Welcome to our lesson on archaeology of the New Testament. And there are so many finds, it's hard to pick from the long list of findings that talk about people, places, and events during the first century period. But we've come down with 7 things. I've come down with 7 things I'd like to discuss this morning with you. And the first of which is the John Rylands manuscript P52. Now, biblical manuscripts, copies of the New Testament are very important to us because we believe the Bible is inspired, and it's very important how these copies have come down to us. And concerning those copies, some characteristics are very important, like the quality of the copy. Is it in good shape? Can we read it? Another characteristic that's very important is the age. When was it written? Was it written relatively close to the time period of the original, or was it written many years later? Of course, we would desire that the copy be written as soon as possible after the original. And so this manuscript, P52, is the oldest manuscript, it's just a small piece, that we have from the New Testament. It measures about 9 centimeters by 6 centimeters, or about the size of a credit card. So it's not very big. It's written on both the front and back from John, the Gospel of John, chapter 18. It was found all the way over in Egypt, which is a long ways from the place where John probably wrote this gospel, which would have been Ephesus. And that shows that this document, this gospel, was already in circulation and ended up in Egypt. So what we have here is a very old, in fact, the oldest manuscript we have of the many manuscripts of the New Testament, some 5,500 copies of manuscripts. And this gives us assurance that the text we have is the text that God intended. The second find that we're going to look at today that's important for New Testament studies is the ossuary of Caiaphas. Now, an ossuary is a bone box. The Jews had a practice at this time of burying people in these burial niches, and then when the flesh would decay and finally dry up and disappear, the bones would be left, and then those bones were collected up and put in these man-made boxes called ossuaries. And this particular ossuary was found just southeast of Jerusalem in 1990, and it mentions the name of Joseph bar Chakba. And these writings, we know also this name from Josephus. Josephus tells us that Caiaphas, the high priest, his personal name was Joseph, and that's the name that's written on this ossuary. The ossuary contains the remains of 6 different people. Like I said, they would collect the bones up after the bones would all dry up, and they would put them in the ossuary. And one of these bones was of a man about 60 years old. And it's quite possible that this is Caiaphas, the high priest mentioned in the New Testament. The beautiful ornate patterns on the ossuary shows that this was a man of, or a family of quite high influence. The next find is a piece of heel bone, or ankle bone, that was found with a large nail driven right through the center of it. And this is really our only bit of archaeological evidence for crucifixion. We have evidence of crucifixion from the historical records. The Romans wrote about it, so we know about this practice. But this was the first time we actually had archaeological evidence of crucifixion. And so we have this bone piece. The person's name was Yohanan, and the large nail pierced right through his heel bone. Okay, we see here in this slide an artist's depiction of what crucifixion might have looked like. So here we see the nail. In this depiction, it shows the nail going through both ankles. That was some of the earlier conclusions, but later they revised their conclusions and felt the nail wasn't long enough to go through both ankle bones. I noticed that the person was given something to sit on that was to prolong the agony of crucifixion, because you need to kind of push up from your diaphragm to breathe. And so to prolong the agony, because crucifixion was meant to be a slow and agonizing death, they would give the person a little seat to sit on. And you'll remember that they wanted to hasten the death of the criminals on either side of Jesus, so they broke their leg bones, and so that would hasten death. They couldn't breathe as well. But when they came to Jesus, they found that he was already dead. At a place called Caesarea, near the coast, along the Mediterranean, was found an inscription that mentioned another person from the New Testament, this time Pontius Pilate. This inscription was part of the theater there at Caesarea that was originally built by Herod, but later renovated in the 4th century. And during that remodeling, this about a 1 meter high stone was reused as a building block in the construction of a small staircase. So it kind of just got picked up as building material and got incorporated into something else. But it mentions Pontius Pilate, and the inscription here, as we look at it, Tiberium Pontius Pilatus. The letters in brackets show that they're missing, that part's been damaged or broken off. Prefectus MDA, and the translation would be Tiberius Pontius Pilate, prefect of Judea. And so we see this confirms this person really did exist, and just like in the same time period that the New Testament describes him. The Gallio inscription mentions the name of this individual, who is also mentioned in Acts 18:12. It says, "But while Gallio was proconsul of Achaia, the Jews with one accord rose up against Paul and brought him before the judgment seat." So this fragment, it's actually 9 pieces. It was a letter written by the Emperor Claudius in about 52, and it was discovered in the 20th century at a place called Delphi in Greece at the Temple of Apollo. And this fragment is important because it mentions the name of someone that's mentioned in the Bible, but it helps us to precisely date the Pauline chronology in the book of Acts. It's very helpful because proconsuls only function for 1 year, so we could precisely put that in Paul's timeline. The pool of Siloam is mentioned in John 9:7. When Jesus was healing the blind man, he made a mixture of clay and spit, applied it to his eyes, and then Jesus told him to go wash in the pool of Siloam. Now, if you've even taken a trip to Israel or heard things in the past, there was actually another place that they thought was the pool of Siloam, but actually that pool area was from the Byzantine period, a few hundred years after the time of Jesus. Archaeologists are fairly convinced that this new finding found in 2005, is the authentic Pool of Siloam. And when I was in Israel in 2007, I had heard that this new pool had been found, and it wasn't yet open to the public, but I knew of the general location. So as I was walking around the ancient city of David, I kind of knew the general area, and I saw this kind of makeshift door with GI sheet with kind of a security guard outside. So I asked the man, may I take a look inside? And he agreed, and sure enough, that was the beginning period of the excavation of this site of the Pool of Siloam. So in some way, I feel like I discovered this. Actually, that's not true, but it was kind of fun just stumbling upon this place before it was open to the public. And it's a huge pool area. They found it while they were doing other construction, and it dates to the 1st century. And scholars are pretty certain that this is indeed the Pool of Siloam mentioned in the New Testament. A place that is important in New Testament studies goes along with the event of Jesus' crucifixion and burial is the tomb of Jesus. And there are two main candidates for the place of Jesus' burial. One is called the Garden Tomb. This is a relatively new find dating back to the 19th century. This has been promoted by Protestants for the most part. The other candidate is promoted by Catholics and Eastern Orthodox. And if you were to take a trip to Israel, they would probably bring you to this place, the Garden Tomb. And this is the supposed burial spot of Jesus. Archaeologists have examined this tomb, and they've concluded that this tomb is much too old to be the tomb of Jesus. The New Testament describes that Jesus' body was placed in a tomb in which no one had yet been laid, indicating that it was a relatively new tomb. This tomb here at the Garden Tomb is an Iron Age tomb, so it's at least 500, 600 years too old to be the tomb of Jesus. The other candidate for the burial place of Jesus is the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. And this tradition goes way back, much farther back than the tradition for the Garden Tomb. And when Constantine came to faith, converted to Christianity, he sent his mother, Helena, to Jerusalem to look for Christ's tomb. And there they found 3 crosses were found near a tomb, so they concluded this must have been the burial place of Jesus. And so they built a church on that spot around 326. There are 1st century tombs in that location. And because of this, this makes the Church of the Holy Sepulchre a much better candidate for the burial place of Jesus than the Garden Tomb. The Garden Tomb we can pretty much rule out. But if you do have a chance to go to Israel, don't pass up the Garden Tomb. It's a great place to meditate. It's not quite as hectic and crowded as the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. And it's a good place to pray and remember what happened there. The event is actually much more important than the place. It's very difficult to know for certain that a tomb is of a particular person unless we have an inscription. And at neither of these places do we have an inscription saying Jesus of Nazareth was buried here. Of course, what really is important is the fact that his body was not there. He raised from the dead, and He's resurrected today, and that's the event that we remember. So of the two candidates, I would have to go with the Church of the Holy Sepulchre if I had to choose between the two. But we can't say for certain. But the important thing is that our Savior is indeed risen.